Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I think we're on text 24, 25. Nobody knows? You guys should know. We'll go back to 23. Shaknoti ihaiva yat shodhum prakshadira vimokshanat kama krodot bhavam vegam sa yukta sa sukhi nadaha. Shaknoti Iha eva yaha shodhum. Yaha, one who, shaknoti, he is able, shodhum, to endure, iha, in this world. Prak, shadira, vimokshanat. Prak, before, shadira, vimokshanat, before being liberated from this body. Which is another way of saying before dying. So if you're able to, in this world, tolerate and endure kama, krodo, udbhavam vegam, if you're able to deal with the urges that come from lust and anger, sayukta, you're yogad. Sasuki nadaha, and you're a happy person. One who's able to endure in this world before dying, while living in this world, the urges which come about as a result of lust and anger, that person is yogad, and they're happy. When I gave class last week, if you guys can't even remember the verse, I think you'll be hard-pressed to remember what we spoke about last week. It's not the best thing in the world for a teacher to have your students able to follow what you said from week to week so you can build on what you've taught is ideal. To have a bunch of children who can't remember what verse you're on. Or, like I know we're on text 24. I know we went over it lightly, and then we have to hit it again in more detail. If you guys are just doing the same thing every single time, then I end up teaching preschool every class. It's discouraging as a teacher to have unfocused students who are incapable of holding the knowledge that you pour into them. So, last week, I mentioned that these verses could be read as prescriptive as well as descriptive. Descriptive in the sense that the preceding verses described a self-realized soul, someone with the knowledge that had been glorified earlier on in the chapter. Knowledge was glorified earlier on for illuminating everything, for being like the sun in the life of a devotee, for dispelling ignorance, bringing light. And then the person who had become accomplished in that knowledge was described. Somebody approached me about doing a wedding. Generally speaking, I do weddings for people that I'm close to, or people who have a substantive relationship with our temple. But we do get calls from out-of-town people who want to get married at our temple. So I got a call just a couple hours ago. And they asked if we could do their wedding. So first thing I asked was, "Are you vegetarian?" And the lady said, "Mostly." But I mean, unless you're dealing with somebody who's on like a carnivore keto diet, most of the food people eat is vegetarian food. Like you go get a Big Mac at McDonald's and fries and an apple pie and a soda. That meal was mostly vegan. You know? If you looked at the calories included in that meal, the vast majority of the calories are the carbs from the French fries and the oil and the bread and the sauces and the pie and the oil that the pie was fried in and the filling in the pie and the drink. You know? The salad on the burger. I mean, the only thing that's non-vegan in the whole meal is just that little patty on the burger. So a lot of times when you ask Indian people, "Are you vegetarian?" They go, "Yes, veg, non-veg." And you're like, that just means you're non-veg. That's what that's equivalent to. It's not like if you're non-veg, you're not allowed to eat grains or vegetables or fruits. Non-veg means veg, non-veg. There's no reason to be redundant. They're just trying to get in and be one of the cool kids. So she was like, almost, mostly. And I'm like, what does that mean? She's like, well, I mainly eat vegetarian food. I'm like, yeah, but what else do you eat? She's like, well, sometimes I might eat like chicken or fish. I'm like, so you eat chicken and fish? She's like, sometimes. I'm like, okay, so you're not vegetarian. I'm like, what about you? She's Punjabi. So she told me she was Punjabi. I got the memo. And then the guy's from UP, and so he said, sometimes I eat eggs, which isn't, I don't eat eggs, but I don't want to beat anybody up too bad about it, especially compared to her. He wasn't doing so. But he admitted that sometimes socially he'll eat some chicken or something like that if he's forced to, if he's out at a conference or something like that. Can you hear me okay, Tadeo? All right. So, this interview was tanking, meaning that I wasn't going to do the wedding for him. But then the guy said, I used to attend the temple, in Detroit for 6 years as a kid. It was my temple. I went there every week. And I know a couple of devotees. So now I was like, all right, I'll probably do your wedding. Let's see what happens. So we started talking a little bit more. And then she made, and I was feeling like warm and fuzzy. And I was going to agree to do their wedding. Few people, socially distanced, all that stuff, obviously. And then she said, do you have an Indian priest? And I said, oh, you're racist. Like I said that on the call. She said, no. And I said, yes, you are racist. I said, let me explain it to you. There are 6 or 7, depending on your state, protected classes in the U.S. And if you ask somebody, are you male or female? Are you straight or gay? What's your religion? What's your ethnicity? How old are you? And there's one other. How am I missing it? Are you disabled, right? That's a lawsuit. You're not allowed to ask such things. I don't know if it's actually like a full lawsuit, but it's illegal. And I said the reason is because that is evidence of discrimination. I said, so you are not acting in a professional capacity, so it's not illegal, but it's racist, just as racist as the people who do it illegally, but you're allowed to be racist in this country in your private life, but you're not allowed to be racist in your public life. But I don't have to do your wedding. I said, you must have misunderstood. I said, we're Hare Krishna people. We don't believe in judging people by their ethnicity. We believe Brahmins are Brahmins, priests are priests, based on their lifestyle, based on their sadachar. I said, so you obviously, you don't understand what we're about. I got like a little, I'm like, because you're from North India. I go, I get it. You guys mix with the Muslims too much. They ruined your culture. So like you have this kind of like, your language is 70% Urdu, and so many Muslim customs have become yours, but you have to go to South to find anybody who actually understands the Shastra. And so you've embraced this casteism, which has made India the bane of the world in the international court. It's one of the biggest problems with the United Nations. And despite so much affirmative action and so many reservations by your own government, your first Chief Justice who helped put together your Constitution was an untouchable. You had a woman as a prime minister. Back in the 60s, we still haven't had a woman president in our country. And despite so much what they call reservations, which is affirmative action, really aggressive affirmative action, like the castes have to be represented in Parliament. Imagine if you had like so many black people and so many Mexican people in the Senate and in the Congress. That's India. Right, Raviji? It makes us look like we're like so backwards. They're so aggressive in terms of their egalitarianism. I said, but you don't understand that because you got so much of this Muslim influence in your life. You don't know what the Shastra says. We do. We follow the Shastra. And I said, but this skin disease you have and this casteism you have, it makes me repulsed and I don't want to do your wedding anymore. I'll recommend some temples and you can go there and they can do your wedding in Hindi. We would have done it in Sanskrit. They'll do it in Hindi. I said we would have done all the kriyas so nicely. They'll do some poor version of it. All the rituals we would have done so nicely. I really, I don't know why I did this. A lot of times I'm just tolerant, but I was already on the fence about doing their wedding and they just got in under the wire and I was making an exception, and so now if they're going to pull the racism thing, the casteism thing, I'm not feeling it. We have Indian priests, but if you only want an Indian priest, it's not going to work. You want a priest who can intone the mantras properly, according to Chanda. You want that? We can do that. You want somebody who's living a pure life? We can do that. But if you want somebody, I'm like, you have this caste disease. My Shastra says, Brahma janatiti brahmanaha. A Brahman is one who knows Brahman, not somebody who's born in a particular family. I go in and you have so many ideas about what is pure, but you're all half Muslim. This is like a big criticism to people, Hindus from India. And so right, Raviji? Of course, Ravi's in ecstasy because he's from South India.
Hare Krishna.
So he's like, there was a king, his name was Shivaji, and he fought the Muslims to a standstill. And they weren't able to go so far south. So when you look, there's a particular point. It's like Andhra Pradesh, kind of goes across Andhra Pradesh. But below that point, none of the cities have Muslim names. Like Hyderabad has a Muslim name. But after you get south of Hyderabad, and also to the east, there's
one more. Tipu Sultan was Mysore also was a Muslim ruler was there.
Yeah, that's in Karnataka.
Yeah.
I was talking about Hyderabad, which is in Andhra. Karnataka's there. They also came Kerala side. The Muslims came, but they could not get in. There's a particular piece there. Andhra, Tamil Nadu, like that. There's a particular kind of, a little bit of Karnataka's mixed in, and they didn't get below that. And so those places they were never ruled by Muslims. There was a very, very strong Marathi king named Shivaji. If you go to the eco-village, the fort on top of the hill at the eco-village, Radhanath Maharaj's place, the fort on top of the hill, who's been there? The fort on top of the hill, you guys don't know? It was a fort on top of a hill. It's like a 4-hour hike from the eco-village. And that fort was Shivaji's fort, one of them. It was the highest place all around. It had a natural spring, and so you could see the armies coming from 50 miles away, and then you could jet out the other way. So that's why you built forts on top of mountains, because they give you a tactical advantage, because you're shooting stuff down on people, and they have to climb up, which is very difficult to get to you. And while they're climbing up to get to you, you can slaughter them. But then you also have a tactical advantage in that you can see much further than they can see. And you can see exactly what's going on, and it's very, very difficult to surprise somebody who's on the mountain. That's why military establishments they would always want the high ground. It gave a tactical advantage, and it also took away the element of surprise. It's not just in South India. I'm on a tangent now. It's just what we're doing. A little Indian history class. It's not just in South India. Also in North India, there were the Jat kings. They were farmers who took up arms. It's like if you go to Kusham Sarovar in Vrindavan with those beautiful memorials that are built there. Those were all built by the Jat kings. The Jat people were from Western India, Punjab, kind of that area, and also in what's modern day Pakistan, which didn't used to be. Pakistan didn't used to be Pakistan. Pakistan used to be part of India until 1947. And Afghanistan only became a country in the 1700s, maybe 1740 or something like that. And so previously, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, that whole stan thing means place, and it's Sanskrit. So, there were different, the Persians were coming on one side and the Hindus were coming on the other side. But the Jat kings in North India, there was the Rajputs, they were in Rajasthan. The Jats, they were all over North India and Punjab and also in UP. They fought the Muslims to standstills over and over again. Actually, there's this far out thing that happened where there was what was his name? Abdali, Dinar, the first king of Afghanistan, the person who made Afghanistan. He marched on Delhi and defeated the Muslims who were there because they were Persians. So, although they were all Muslims, they still fought with each other. It's not like all the Muslims were friends. And so he marched on Delhi and took Delhi. And he also, I think he was with his son, and they also took Mathura. And the accounts of that time were horrific. Just hundreds of bodies. One biographer says he found 200 children, slaughtered babies and infants in a pile. And the stench was so bad. And slaughtered people in the streets of Mathura and Vrindavan. They wanted to put everybody on a spear because it was a Hindu holy place. And they were aggro Muslims, and so that was their thing. So they took Delhi, the Afghanis, and they took Vrindavan, and they took Mathura, and they desecrated the place, raped the women. Thousands of women are reported to have jumped into Jamuna to drown themselves so they wouldn't be raped. But that was the program: rape, pillage, murder. And then the Nagababas rose up. The Nagababas are the naked Shaiva sadhus that put ash on their body. But they like Vrindavan. They go to Vrindavan. I don't think all of them have such a well-established theology. But what happened was, amongst those renunciates that lived in India during the medieval period, during the Mughal rule, eventually they would take up arms because they were trying to be sadhus, but it would upset them what was going on. And so they were down. Sometimes farmers took up arms. That's where the whole Jat Empire was, farmers who took up arms. And so much you see, like with Chinese martial arts, so many of the Chinese instruments, the weapons, are actually farming implements that were then turned into weapons. Even the scimitar is a scythe turned into the Islamic scimitar that's on their one of their holy symbols. Is a scythe used for cutting down grain that got weaponized. So the farmers took up arms, but eventually holy men took up arms. And the Nagababas were famous for being extremely fierce in battle because they didn't care if they lived or died. And they were famous for taking on way bigger armies. And they would jump into battle, and they would chant like Har Har Mahadev, like they would almost like Jai Shri Krishna, but they would go to battle and say that. And I don't think that, all of them were super well established theologically. I think they were like holy men, and they might have liked Vrindavan. They might have even been secret Vaishnavas, but externally they thought it was cool to wear the ash. You know that ash you see? That's ash, that's human ash from a crematorium. They go to a crematorium, they get the ash of burned bodies, and they keep it with them, and they put it on themselves like tilak. They take a nice bath, they wash all their clothes very nicely, but then they cover their body meticulously in human ash to show just how over it they are, how over ritual they are. Of course, it becomes a ritual, and they become the most pedantic about making sure they have just the right ash and cover their body in just the right way. And like you watch them, it's like they're getting made up in drag or something like that for 3 hours every day. And so it's crazy how how much they want to throw away all ritual, but then they ritualize the throwing away of all ritual. And they got to go to a crematorium and you have a skull, and the skull has to be this big, and blah 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 blah. And they have to do all their worship on a dark moon night, and this and that and everything. And they have to dig a pit in the ground of the crematorium and do their meditation, and it has to be this many, this big by this wide and this deep, and da 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 da. And they're like the most pedantic. This is way more than even of your own history, right, Raviji?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay. So the Nagas rose up and they fought in Gokul. Gokul is like we go to Gokul. It's in the Brajmandal Parikrama. It's just adjacent to Vrindavan. And that's where the battle went down. And it was like back and forth and back and forth. And it was just an absolute bloodfest. It was just absolute carnage by both reports from the Hindu as well as the Islamic side, and they beat them. They beat the Afghanis. They beat them twice. They beat the initial force, and then they went and got reinforcements and came back and hit them again, and the Nagabubis rallied with dwindling ranks and just threw themselves into battle. And it was such a loss for the Afghanis that they turned tail and they ran. I don't think it's wrong to get violent for a good cause. And when I hear about, the sadhus who rose up in the times of yore to stick up for the weak and the defenseless, I feel like those are my people. There's different types of compassion. One of the types of compassion is called heroic compassion, which is where it's defined. It's just like all other forms of compassion, but it involves putting yourself in grave danger for somebody else that is not a family member, that's not just your people, but just because they're suffering and they can't take care of themselves, so you step into harm's way. Not because you get something from them, not because it's in your best interest, but just because you see somebody suffering and you feel like obliged to do something, and that something involves risking your life. Anyway, so there's a place for rising up and standing up for the weak and defenseless. Not because you want to get over on them yourself, but just because something should be done. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Prabhupada's guru's guru's guru, Prabhupada's guru's guru's guru. He was a district magistrate. He went to Vrindavan on pilgrimage. And Vrindavan at that time was run by brigands, by dacoits, by armed groups of thugs, gundas, professional criminals who, would lie in wait, kill travelers, and exploit people. They were running Vrindavan. Actually, gundas run Vrindavan even now. The mafia runs most of India in one way or another. If you buy land in India, you pay 10% is what you pay that the government sees, and then 90% of it's paid off in bribes. So if you buy a $100,000 piece of land, $10,000 is the money that's changed hands legally, and then $90,000 is changed hands illegally. That's how heavy the mafia presence is in Vrindavan. And every once in a while, every few years, somebody will roll into Vrindavan with a machine gun and kill a bunch of people. Like there'll be a straight up Godfather-style mafia hit. Every few years, that happens in Vrindavan. Now, what to speak of back then. You can imagine, this was at a time when slavery was still extant in this country. So you can imagine, it was a long time ago. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur went on pilgrimage. Technically it was just after slavery was abolished, but it was in the 1880s. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur went on pilgrimage to Vrindavan, and he saw what was going on, and he fought, pulled in government troops, used his political pull as a district magistrate, as a district judge, as a high court judge, like a superior court judge, and fought and dealt with and displaced the mafia. He did this multiple times in his life, but he did it in Vrindavan. It just gets a single entry in his journal. Went to Vrindavan on pilgrimage. Some inappropriate things were happening, so we arranged to put a stop to them. It's like, like, what a person, What an amazing personality. So anyway, I stepped up to these casteist people, following in the footsteps of my predecessors. And I told them, like, we're not into it. Like, we have Indian priests, we have non-Indian priests, but if that's what you want, go to a Hindu mandir, have your caste consciousness, be a racist. I'm okay, I don't judge you for being a racist, but I don't want to mix with you, and I definitely don't want to be your priest. They backed down. I told them that before they back down, they should think about it real carefully, give it a few days, and call me back and see what they want to do, and then we'll rediscuss it. It left a sour taste in my mouth, and so I didn't want to discuss it further with them. But this person with knowledge, here in the Gita, a text that's thousands upon thousands of years old, the person is then stated, the self-realized soul sees a learned brahmana and a dog-eater to be on equal footing. And he also sees a dog, a cow, and an elephant as being on equal footing. It's a powerful. Do you understand that, like, in the Bible, Paul, a slave escaped and went to Paul, and Paul told him to go back to his master and not give him any further trouble? That's in the New Testament. Are you guys aware of that? That's in the New Testament. Right? What to speak of the Old Testament? What to speak of the Old Testament? And the endemic slavery of the Old Testament, and the slavery of the Quran, etc., etc. But here we have a text which predates those texts. Arguably. Everybody says their text is the oldest, but I think from an academic perspective, the Gita definitely predates the New Testament. It definitely predates the Quran. And when you talk about the Hebrew Bible, academics would date about 600 BC, and certainly these ideas predate that. But for many scholars, the Gita itself predates that. So when the rest of the world was developing rules for slavery, we have a text here that's militant about the idea that the self-realized person does not judge people by externals, but rather judges somebody by their caliber, who they are. You spacing out? And so we've been glorifying these self-realized souls, but I mentioned that the verses were prescriptive as well as descriptive, and that they could be practiced. And this verse we just read is why these verses are prescriptive as well. They're meant to teach us what we should be doing, because we're being told if you can tolerate the pushings, even in this body, that's what's being spoken about. And so we're being taught to practice these things, to endure these things, to live by these things. You follow? Okay. Before giving up this present body, if one's able to tolerate the urges of the material senses and check the force of desire and anger, he's well situated and is happy in this world. One whose happiness is within, who is active and rejoices within, whose aim is inward. He is actually the perfect mystic. He is liberated in the Supreme, and ultimately he attains the Supreme. Yaha, one who, antasukha, his happiness is within, her happiness is within. Antar aramas, their pleasure is within. Antar jyoti, their light is within. Sayogi, that person's a yogi. Brahma nirvana brahma bhuta adigachati. They are Brahman. they go to Brahman. They're situated in Brahman and they go to Brahman. They're self-realized even in this world, and upon death they also go to liberation. You know this term Jivan Mukta? You heard that term before? Jivan Mukta? Do they call it Jivan Mukti or Jivan Mukta? Yeah. Jivan Mukti. Jivan means living. Mukti means liberation. Jivan Mukta is a person who's liberated while still living. A lot of religions say, spirit is strong, flesh is weak, blah, 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 blah. And if you dig in, it's like you're broken by being in this body. And then God afterwards is going to magically recreate your body, but without defect. It's a really dumb theology. Thomism, the kind of standard Catholic theology that most Christians believe also because it's based on the Bible, is really dumb. It tries to link consciousness and the body. I think it comes from Aristotle. Aristotle believed that ultimately matter had cognitive faculties. This gets into a whole thing. I don't know if I want to get into it. But Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas was his follower. And there were other guys like René Descartes, and they more followed like Plato. Plato made a distinction between the consciousness and the body. And whereas some people like to say that somehow matter is also conscious. And they end up with the same mind-body problem because they got to figure out how to get consciousness out of matter. So they're back in the same problem spot. But then they're also spiritualists. So they believe your soul is eternal, and they believe you're like a ghost, and then God creates your body because you can't actually live a full life without your body. But it ignores the reality, your body becomes like worm food and space dust. You follow? And so viewing ourselves as consciousness within a body, it's a real better way to go. Otherwise you got to have this idea that somehow half of you has become plant food, and then God's got to magically recreate you in your same body because somehow your body as it is right now is required for you to exist. Whereas a simple thought experiment, you can easily conceive of ourselves existing beyond this world, beyond this body, So I mean, we owe so much. I owe so much to Catholics. I've learned so much theology from Catholics. I've learned so much from Thomas Aquinas. These guys were brilliant. They were really smart cookies. They were, like their arguments today hold water. They were working on stuff 800 years ago, and today their stuff still makes sense. But everybody's got these Achilles heels and these blind spots, and that's theirs. But we have this idea that you can be liberated even while living in this world. Now we have something called Videha Mukti, liberation beyond this body. And so it's a little different because you fully transcend the body. But you can be, for all intents and purposes, 1 foot out the door, 1 foot seeing Krishna, even while still walking around in this world. And you get a sense of that with this Brahma Bhuta, Brahma Adhigachati. You're in this world, but you're Brahman. And you also go to Brahman. See, it's like you are Brahman and you go to Brahman. You're happy even while being in this world. You follow? You're trying to get some version of spirituality that doesn't depend on everybody dying in order to realize God. And that's kind of a plausibility structure within Christianity and Islam and Judaism, that you really can't know God in this world. You got to die, and you only know when you die. I don't know why that should be the case necessarily. If you are a soul and you have a body, why couldn't you live in a spiritual way now? Why couldn't you have a spiritual vision now? Why are you incapable of understanding an omnipotent deity who's omnipotent? So therefore, obviously, by his omnipotence, by grace, he could help you understand. He's going to take you all the way back to heaven. He could give you an understanding now. No, because you got a limited mind and brain and flesh. Yeah, but that whole omnipotent thing deals with that. So why is not a manifestation of that grace and that omnipotence that you can understand God? How does that become just kind of arbitrary limitation which is placed on God? Do you follow this? This is just part of my sustained critique of most other religions besides my own. Because they all got it wrong, and ours is the way, the truth, and the light, and no one goes back to the mother except through us. I wish you guys were more on point. Then I could just give class on the verses and not meander around and teach you guys history and this and that and the other thing. The verses are actually better. All right. Those who are beyond dualities that arise from doubts, whose minds are engaged within. By the way, you guys should notice this. Krishna is quite repetitive in the Gita. Have you noticed this? I guess his students were poor caliber too. Sometimes you repeat yourself. People are like, I heard you the first time. And for the most part, I'm like, yeah, I doubt it. Sometimes I meet really sharp people and you say something once and they get it. But for most of us, you need to hear it a few times. You need to hear it on the front end, then you gotta parse it apart and dissect it and go into detail, and then at the end you gotta say it again 3 times. I say it when I introduce it, I pull it apart and say it in extreme detail, and I put it all back together again and say it again at the end. Krishna does that in the Gita. He tells us about being free from dualities and the people who are like this and like that, and beyond heat and cold, pleasure and pain, happiness and distress, who find their light within, their happiness within, their truth within. He repeats all these themes, but every time he repeats, he says something new. So this whole finding your light within, finding your happiness within, finding your pleasure within, he has not said that thus far. In that way. He said, Sukha Atmanivin, he said, Atmanyeva Atmanatushta, one who finds happiness in the self by the self. But not quite like this. Inner light, I mean, how cool is that? Like we can give to some new age people a run for their money, right? You know? Some, the light within me acknowledges the light within you. Krishna give those people a run for their money. The inner light, inner joy, inner happiness, right? The kingdom of God is within. This is good stuff. So he adds a little bit every time he does it. This idea of enduring in this world, that's a new idea that hasn't been brought up quite that way yet. This idea that you are Brahman and you go to Brahman. You know, and then this idea of Brahma Nirvana. That's another one. He brought that up in the 2nd chapter. It comes up, Nirvana is a negative thing. Nirva, blowing out, extinguishing. Brahma is a positive thing. Bri means to grow. Brahma is like ever-evolving spirit. And so you've got these 2 different ways of describing spirit. One is positive, the other one is negative. One is Buddhist, the other one is Hindu. And Krishna merges them together. Which is cool. There's just so much more there that we could unpack. How it's best to define things both via positiva as well as via negativa. How you have to have cataphatic theology, God exists. You have to have an apophatic theology, God doesn't exist like you exist as a contingent being, depending on other things. God doesn't not exist. Just to get you completely outside of trying to think about God in material terms like you in any way. And so there's room for these via positiva, via negativa definitions. Krishna uses them over and over again. They have incredible value. And he's always adding a few new bells and whistles, but going over some of the same information. And we certainly need to hear it more than once. I mean, how many times do you need to hear to get over the dualities of this world and the inevitable daily ups and downs and perturbations of your mind? You know what I mean? How often do you fall victim to the ebbs and flows of your mind, and you need to be pulled out of the trough of slop that you're wallowing in? You know, it's at least for the fairer half of our population once a month. And I tend to think men must have some kind of cycle as well. I don't know what it is, but I'm suspicious, you know? It might not be as regulated as the moon cycle, but I would tend to think with our circadian rhythms that there's going to be like a male cycle. Well, I do know that, you know, like, do you know this time of day when you're strongest? 5 p.m. There is like a circadian rhythm. You know, you've digested a couple of meals, you got some long and short carbs, some complex and simple carbs in you, and you're ready to go. There are times of the day that's been well established for everybody. But I tend to think there's probably also like a monthly or, you know, bi-monthly or fortnightly, whatever it is. It might differ from man to man, but I think we all have our rhythm where we get a little manic and get a little depressed. The seasons themselves just do it to everybody. Day and night. Day and night, the seasons, the monthly cycle for ladies, whatever the cycle is for men, your circadian rhythms. We need to hear this daily. What happens in the life of a devotee? What happens? Gopal, are you listening?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. What happens in the life of a devotee is as we progress in our life, the dualities we suffer from change. Most people think they cannot live without orgasming regularly. They're wrong. You can be completely celibate and quite happy. Usually people figure that out a little later on in life. But you don't even need to wait. Most people think they can't live without eating. They're wrong. You can. And not without eating entirely. I mean, I went without food I did a 42-day juice fast. But that's juice, so that doesn't count. I fasted from water for 4.5 days on 2 separate occasions. And I've gone without food for weeks on end many times, just on a liquid diet, the longest of which was 42 days. When I say you can live without eating, I don't mean you can actually live completely without taking in any calories. I mean that you can live without eating opulent, fine, fancy food and living and dying based on your cupcakes and your sweets and your yummies and your fried goodies and niblets and that kind of stuff. If you're from Southern California, you have one of the weakest constitutions on the planet because our weather is so mild. We like lose our minds if there's like a little bit of rain. Everybody it's like, I'm melting. But if you just move to Germany for the wintertime, or live in Russia in the wintertime, or, you know what I mean? If you just go someplace just ungodly where human beings should not live, and you spend a winter there, you just learn to deal. You toughen up. In contrast, if you move here and you're from a real tough country, you get weak. You adapt. You get weak. The dualities that we face ebb and flow based on what we're dealing with. But here's what I want to say. The dualities you face as a devotee change over time. They become more pure. They become more about falling in love with Krishna. And they become more about letting go of everything so that nothing stands in your way. Having a steady mind at the beginning of your spiritual life is like not eating meat or having illicit sex or taking intoxication. Having a steady mind in the intermediate phase of your spiritual life is never falling victim to pride or judgment or fame, criticism, resentment. And as you go up beyond that, being beyond duality is never forgetting how much you love Krishna, never putting anything in between you and Krishna, letting Krishna shine like the sun in your life that governs and controls all other aspects of your life, and getting beyond duality of the entire material delusion. And so, this idea of being steady and being equipoised and being beyond duality, in the beginning of your life, it's just about not falling victim to legitimate illegal vices. And as you progress, it gets more subtle, and it becomes about negative thought patterns. And as you progress even more, it becomes never letting anything get between you and Krishna. You can actually understand everything in light of the last one. And you're getting over your vices is so that ultimately nothing will get in between you and Krishna. But then you realize there's these other things getting in between you and Krishna, namely all of your negative mental patterns of thought. So you got to deal with them. And eventually, the whole material idea that this is my home and this is my place and I'm meant for this place, even to be peaceful and pious in this world, becomes a drag. And you have to get over even sukritota anarthas, even anarthas and bad things, unwanted things that come from piety. Krishna says in the Gita, he says, Sukha sangena bandhati, jnana sangena chanaga, the mode of goodness, tatra sattvam nirmalatva, is pure. Purer than anything else. Prakashakam anamayam, it's illuminating, it's pure, free from disease or dirtiness. It's pure. Sukha sangena bandhati, jnana sangena chanaga, but it conditions you and binds you by happiness and knowledge. We even speak of bhakti-yuta anarthas, anarthas that come from bhakti itself. You become a devotee, and then people think, oh, he's a devotee, and you start to relish, oh, people think I'm a devotee. Like you become proud of being a devotee. Or you become a devotee, and then people help you, and you become attached to that help. And you become dependent on that help, and that drags you down. Even the fruits of bhakti, other than pure love of Krishna, need to ultimately be dropped and let go of. Even the fruits of piety ultimately need to be let go of. And so when we talk about duality that comes up over and over in the Gita, for us it may just be a straight concordance. It may be that, oh, I need to hear not to get crazy caught up in the ups and downs of my pathetic materialistic life on a daily basis. I'm swinging my hammer in the sun. I'm swinging my hammer in the rain. I got to study even though like my stomach hurts. My significant other's giving me a hard time, giving me a drag. I got to get over it. And you keep going forward. We might need to hear that 1,000 times. But these lessons can be lived out and understood and appreciated on a much higher scale in the hierarchy. Or ultimately, at some point, we have to you have to powerfully move into spirituality. And you have to go for the gold. Like, have you ever seen those people who do the pole vaulting? It's like, I think it's like, might be like the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my entire life. These people, like, they have this gnarly 20-foot stick, or whatever it is, 15-foot stick. And they grab it and they just run, and then they throw it in the ground, and they launch themselves up like 20 plus feet in the air. It's like, it's higher than the ceiling here. It's insane. And they just get over the crossbeam. Like, their feet just go over, and they like, once they get to where their feet go over, they have to fling their bodies. They're holding on a stick. They got to fling themselves because they've gone so high that their feet get over, but then they need that last little push. So they push and they fling their bodies up so their body just gets over the thing. And then they fall down. It's like, it's such an amazing thing. We have to fling ourselves at Krishna, ultimately. We all become sannyasis. We all die. We all have to stare down death and fling ourselves to Krishna and out of this world. And powerfully lock on to Krishna and never let go. We have to attach ourselves to the deity's feet in an irrevocable way, in a powerful, dramatic, Olympic way. And transcending duality ultimately becomes that. Letting go of everything that's holding us back. You can actually understand that today and then go back to dealing with your vices and your negative behavior traits, understanding that the rabbit hole is going to go infinitely deeper and that you're going to keep being able to look at verses which talk about being free from duality and derive merit from them. Ultimately finding that light in yourself, that joy in yourself, that's ultimately you find Krishna. First it's like the idea that you're a soul and you're conscious and the beauty of the soul, but eventually it becomes embracing and loving Krishna in a unique and powerful, earth-shattering, romantic way. Those who are beyond the dualities that arise from doubts, whose minds are engaged within, who are always busy working for the welfare of all living beings, and who are free from all sins, they achieve liberation as supreme. Those who are free from anger and all material desires, who are self-realized, self-disciplined, and constantly endeavoring for perfection, are assured of liberation in the supreme in the very near future. Shutting out all external objects, keeping the eyes and vision concentrated between the two eyebrows, suspending the inward and outward breaths within the nostrils, and thus controlling the mind, senses, and intelligence. The transcendentalist aiming at liberation becomes free from desire, fear, and anger. One who is always in this state is certainly liberated. It sounds quite redundant, doesn't it? There's some beautiful stuff like working for the welfare of others. Sarva Bhuta Hite Rata. That's kind of a beautiful one that we haven't hit yet. There's some extra ones. Now we got the eyes between the eyebrows. It's like a straight up like pranayama practice of yoga that we're getting here. It's beautiful, beautiful stuff. Leads us to the last verse. A person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, tell me when I'm out.